Hello, in this lesson, we're going to be configuring our systemd service for Kubelet. So we've configured our container runtime, which is containerd, and now we're ready to set up our Kubernetes worker node agent, which is called Kubelet. We've already installed the binary for Kubelet, so now we just need to configure it and set up our systemd service. And in order to do that, I'm going to need a reference to the host name on each of my worker node servers. So what I'm doing is I'm setting an environment variable that I'm just calling hostname, and I'm doing this on both servers, my first worker server and my second worker server. I'm just setting this hostname environment variable, and I'm going to use $parentheses to just set that to the output of a command, and I'm going to use the hostname command. So all I'm doing here, if I run the actual hostname command, it goes ahead and returns the hostname of the server, and I'm going to need a reference to that value as an environment variable. So I just set that value to this hostname variable, and I'll go ahead and echo that just so you can see what the value is. And of course, over here on the left, it's wboid3.mylabserver.com, and on the right, it's wboid4. And of course, when you do it, this should be your cloud server hostname, so it'll be different from wboid. It will reflect your actual cloud server hostnames. And we're going to use that variable in order to generate some of the files and commands that we're about to do. So next, I'm going to move some files into place, and I'm going to do an ls. I'm actually just here in my home directory, and you may remember that early on in this course, we created some of these files that you see here, and we actually uploaded them to our worker server. So I've got my ca.pem, that's my certificate authority. I've got my kubeproxy.kubeconfig, as well as certificate files and a kubeconfig file that is specific to each server. So over here on the left, it's called wboid3.mylabserver.com-key.pem, and over here on the right, it's wboid4. So those file names reflect the actual name of the server, and that's going to be important because we're going to be referencing those files in some of these commands that we're about to do and some of the configuration files that we're about to create. So I'm going to do a sudo mv to move some of these files into place. And because we set that hostname variable, I'm going to use that hostname variable just so that I can run the same command on both servers. So I'm referencing different files because the value of that variable is different on each server. But even though I'm referencing different files, I can run the same command. So I'm going to move that hostname-key.pem on both servers, and I'm also going to move just the hostname.pem file on both servers. So that is our key file as well as our certificate file that is specific to each server's hostname, and I'm going to move those into var/lib/kubelet. And those two files are just my certificate and key files for the kubelet on each individual host. Next, I'm going to do another sudo mv, and I'm going to reference that hostname variable again, and this time I'm going to move the kubeconfig. So each host has its own kubeconfig file, and that's the file that I'm moving with this command. And I'm going to move that into var/lib/kubelet, and I'm actually going to change the name of the file to just kubeconfig. So I'm moving it into this directory and renaming it to just kubeconfig, and that's going to be my kubeconfig that's going to be used by the kubelet service. And last but not least, I'm going to move my certificate authority, my ca.pem. That's going to need to go in var/lib/kubernetes. So that's going to be the certificate authority that my local Kubernetes services are going to use. So now that I've moved those files into place, I'm ready to go ahead and create a configuration file for my kubelet. So I'm going to create this file, var/lib/kubelet/kubeletconfig.yaml. And this is just going to be a YAML configuration for my local kubelet. And as you can see, I'm referencing those certificate files that I just moved into place down here. So this is where we're passing in the location of our certificate file and our key file, as well as our certificate authority, and we're also providing some other configuration values here to our kubelet. So I'm going to go ahead and create that file, and now I'm ready to create my systemd unit file. So here I'm creating my etc systemd/system/kubelet.service. And this service is simply running my kubelet executable. We're passing in some flags. Here's the reference to the file that we just created, that kubelet YAML configuration file. Here's a reference to our kube config that we just moved into place. And two other flags I want to draw your attention to is this hostname override flag and the allow privileged equals true flag. And the reason I want to draw your attention to these is because if you're following along with this course and you're familiar with the original Kubernetes the Hard Way guide on GitHub, these are flags that are different from what Kelsey Hightower was using in the original guide. And I've added this hostname override because in our cloud server setup, our kubelets are not going to automatically pick up the correct hostname. And what winds up happening is they will not report the node name as the host name, they'll report it as the IP address, and that's going to cause some problems because different parts of our cluster are going to interpret those node names in different ways, and it's not going to match up. All you really need to know is that for things to work in our particular setup, we're going to need to specify this hostname override flag. And of course, we're referencing that variable that we created earlier to set that to the actual host name of each individual host. And we also have this allow privileged equals true flag. And the reason we need that is because the networking plugin that we're going to be using actually runs as pods inside our Kubernetes cluster. And those pods are going to need to be able to do some privileged actions in order to manage our networking. So we need to turn on that allow privileged equals true flag to allow our networking plugins to work later on. And I'll explain that in a little more detail when we actually get to the point where we're ready to configure our networking setup. So I'm going to go ahead and execute that command, and I have now created my systemd unit file for my kubelet service. That's all for this lesson. Kubelet is installed and ready to go. In the next lesson, we'll set up our kube proxy service, and then we'll start up all of our services and make sure everything is working the way that we expect it to.